Hi everyone, welcome to A Reformed Catholic. I'm Jeff. On this channel we discuss all things theology, philosophy, ecumenism and apologetics. I'm really excited about this video because I'm going to be discussing the zombie argument, which was actually one of a key parts of my master's thesis. Well, before I jump into it, let me just set out the context of where this argument fits in before I jump into the argument itself. Now, when we think about arguments against atheism, I think a particular pastor named John Tyson has summarized it really well on X. He talks about the 6 miracles that every atheist should believe in. The first is the miracle that something comes from nothing. This is the idea that the universe came into existence from nothing, without a cause or an external agent. It just popped into existence. Now, the Kalam cosmological argument, for example, falls into this category of argument. The second miracle that an atheist ought to believe is that order comes from chaos. This is the idea that this highly ordered universe with all its complex physical laws and constants emerged from practically a chaotic event that was instigated by the Big Bang. Again, arguments like the fine-tuning argument fits into this particular category. The third class of miracles that every atheist should believe in is the idea that life emerges from non-life. This is the idea that life emerged from static matter, sentient, intelligent, biological life came from inorganic matter, and this really questions the idea of abiogenesis. The fourth class of miracles you could call the personal from the non-personal. This is the idea that the subjective experience, personhood, consciousness, all these very human attributes, which are very non-physical or seemingly non-physical, came about through an impersonal material process. The fifth miracle is reason from non-reason. The idea that the human ability to reason and to construct and to exercise logic and to engage in inquiry and empirical investigation, all of that came from a non-rational material process. And finally, the last miracle is morality from matter, which is that objective moral values or ethical systems, which we all believe in, most of us, came from physical, amoral matter. Now, this is kind of a summary of the 6 miracles that atheists should believe in, and it kind of captures some of the strongest arguments against atheism. And within these 6 arguments, the one that I want to focus on today is the fourth, which is personal from non-personal. The idea that subjective experience, consciousness, comes from physical matter. Now, I really do think that this is a problem for the atheist worldview, because the subjective world that we experience, there's an inner movie that runs in our heads. There is something that it feels like to eat chocolate or drink coffee. The idea that that subjective experience came from the objective world of matter and physicality is really hard to explain, and perhaps the hardest kind of conundrum facing atheists today. Now, I think that there are a number of responses that are given to this particular question. The first is that some atheists actually deny that consciousness is real. Some atheists think that consciousness is just an illusion. And philosophers like Daniel Dennett have made this really popular. Again, without going to too much philosophy here, I think that this is just really not a satisfying response, because if there is one thing you can be certain of, it is that you are experiencing your own subjective ways of thinking, ways of feeling, and your inner world is more real than anything that is out there objectively. Because at the end of the day, all you know is all you know. Now, the second kind of response that's often given is that consciousness is real, but it's just a physical process. Because at the end of the day, our brain generates consciousness, and consciousness someday will be explained by physical processes, just like at the moment your brain can be explained by physical processes. And often a lot of people who believe in this call themselves materialist reductionists, because what they believe is that at the end of the day, what we can do is we can break down complex things like consciousness all the way down into subatomic particles and explain them that way. And reductionism is quite a powerful methodology, because I think it's really something that undergirds the scientific principle. What I mean by this is that at the end of the day, the way science works is by abstraction. At the end of the day, biology can be explained by chemistry, and chemistry can be explained by physical laws, macrophysics if you like, and then macrophysics can be explained by microphysics and subatomic particles. So at the end of the day, these building blocks of nature, the subatomic particles and their relevant laws, are sufficient to explain even complex things. Sure, we haven't quite gotten there yet with consciousness, but one day we can. A simple analogy for this is, say you see a really intricate Lego masterpiece where you see this castle with dragons and with moats and everything like that, and it looks really complex. But at the end of the day, at the bottom, it's just Lego blocks, right? These Lego blocks and their arrangement can ultimately explain this complex structure. In the same way, the constituent fundamental particles of the universe can explain the most complex phenomenon that we see. And the third kind of explanation, I guess, for consciousness would be this idea of strong emergence. This is the idea that we can't actually reduce consciousness to physical matter, at least in the physical matter in terms of subatomic particles that we know. Because what actually happens is, at some level, when atoms and when the chemistry works in a certain way, when it's arranged in a certain way, there is an emergent property. Yes, that property is physical, but it can't be reduced down to its fundamental constituents. What this means then is that we can't actually explain consciousness in terms of its building blocks, even though consciousness is still in some way treated as a physical thing. Now again, I think there are problems with this. The problem here is that it just seems like we are making this arbitrary miracle happen, right? We're just saying when matter is combined in a special way, poof, the consciousness appears out of nowhere. And I think this is a problem for those atheists or materialists who hold to this view that strong emergence is the way that we look at consciousness, where consciousness just appears into existence. Well, I think amidst all of these responses, I think is the context for the zombie argument. Now, I should be very, very clear here. When I talk about the zombie argument and zombies in general, I'm not referring to, the Hollywood zombies where, the undead kind of try to, kill you, or they form the premise to many a horror movie. What I'm referring to at the moment when I speak about zombies is philosophical zombies. Again, not Hollywood zombies, but philosophical zombies. What do we mean by philosophical zombies? Well, philosophical zombies are basically a thought experiment. Now, imagine this, right? Imagine there's a parallel world or parallel universe where there is a being that is exactly like you, a being that looks like you, acts like you, behaves like you, has the same number of hair follicles as you, has the exact neural structure of the brain as you do. It is precisely you in every physical characteristic, down to its subatomic particles, but it lacks consciousness. It has everything that you have, but it lacks this inner movie of what it feels like to eat chocolate, to drink coffee. Now the question is such a philosophical zombie conceivable? If we can imagine such a zombie without making any logical errors or without making any contradictions in terms of the physical laws that we know, then we could then move to a possibility. If it's conceivable that we can, imagine such a zombie, then perhaps it's possible that this zombie could exist. And if it's true that it could exist, that this zombie has, no feelings, no thoughts, no awareness, it's just a mindless shell that's acting as if it's conscious, even though it's not. If we can imagine such a zombie, then maybe consciousness is something that is beyond physical processes, because physical processes alone cannot produce the kind of consciousness that we experience. And, philosophers like David Chalmers have made this argument really popular, and I think it's quite a powerful argument, because if zombies are something that are at least possible, if the universe could have existed in such a manner that there is no consciousness anywhere, even in this world, then it must mean that physical properties are not enough to give us consciousness, even though this world and this zombie world is an exact physical replica. So, to summarize, if zombies are conceivable, then perhaps they are possible. And if they are possible, then perhaps consciousness cannot be reduced down to physical properties. Now, this is just a video, and there's a lot of literature surrounding this, a lot of objections, responses. I should say at the outset that this is not a foolproof argument, but I think it's a powerful argument, because I think, for me, all the responses that I've seen regarding why the conception of a zombie doesn't work, or even if it is conceivable, it may not be possible, all these arguments I think really are not very strong. And if this argument does succeed, and if we do conclude that consciousness can't be reduced to physical properties, and if consciousness can't be reduced to physical properties, it must be grounded by something that is not physical. And I think this is where this argument really points to God. It doesn't prove God. I don't think this argument will ever prove that God exists. But I certainly think that if this argument succeeds, if this argument is sound, then I do think that it leads to the view that consciousness cannot be grounded by the physical, therefore consciousness must be grounded by the non-physical, perhaps by another consciousness. And this is where we sort of converge into this argument regarding God. Because I think that the only reason that we have consciousness, if this argument succeeds, is because God himself has created the universe. Yes, there are physical laws. Yes, we have brains, which are a necessary condition for consciousness, but certainly it is not a sufficient condition for consciousness, because God himself is at work in producing consciousness over and above the physical laws that we experience. Now, that is a lot to take in, but I think it suffices to say that this particular miracle that atheists believe, that the personal comes from the non-personal, is a serious problem. There hasn't been a really strong position that's being defended by atheists as far as I can see. The only thing that they can fall back to is, as I said before, that they have to argue that actually consciousness is a physical process, which I don't see, or they have to argue that strong emergence is true, where consciousness just appears when matter is organized in a very specific way, which again seems like an arbitrary miracle. So I hope that's been enlightening for you. It is a bit of a heavy video, but I think it really does touch on why believing in God is in some ways simpler, and it's in some ways less complex than not believing in God. Because at the end of the day, if these 6 miracles have to take place for life to exist as it does, well, the Christian only needs one miracle, which is God existing. Well, I hope that's been really helpful. I hope that's opened your eyes towards a possible another argument regarding God's existence. Thank you very much for watching. Have a great week.